Hi everyone, it's Michelle. Thanks for hanging out with me today. I thought I'd pop on here and talk to you a little bit during this video because I end up showing you a bunch of my favorite tools and supplies. So I wanted to talk to you a little bit about that. I'm going to start with this adorable little gnome stamp set from Simon Says Stamp. I'm not usually a gnome person, but I saw these ones and just had to have them because they're so cute with their little ducks and flowers and butterflies and whatnot. So anyway, I'm going to do some watercoloring. That's my go-to way of coloring things in, just because it goes fast and I really like the look of watercolor. So I'm starting with some watercolor paper and some VersaFine ink. And I put some anti-static powder on that cardstock first because I am going to watercolor over it. So I want to make sure that there's no melted embossing powder on the parts where I end up watercoloring. So that keeps the powder from sticking on the background. And then I'm just going to use my ginormous bottle of clear embossing powder. I use a lot of it. Those are my favorite little deli sheets. They're great for all kinds of different things, using embossing powder and inking on them, and I use them for gel press printing, wiping off my brayer, and they're just handy to have around. So I'm going to use this Altenew watercolor set. I really love these paints because they're very, very bright and they're not very granular, which means there's not like big pieces of pigment, so they're very smooth and they just blend really nicely. I like them a lot, but this is specifically because the color formulas are really brilliant. Altenew is known for their flowers, and so they were designed for that, I believe. It's a great set to have in your stash if you're looking for a fairly inexpensive, accessible watercolor set. And then, of course, a water brush. Super fast and easy, and if you're not really experienced with watercolor, water brushes are great because you don't have to really worry about the water content in your brush while you're painting. The brush just stays wet all the time, so really all you have to do is wipe the excess off on a paper towel when you're done with each color, so you're not always messing with the water. Now when you are using watercolor paints or inks or pencils or markers or anything that you're going to use water on, make sure that you use watercolor paper because it absorbs the water and leaves the pigment on the top, where regular cardstock or paper is just gonna move the pigment around with the water, and everything is gonna soak into the paper, and it doesn't work. So make sure you're using watercolor paper for this technique. And pretty much any water-based product will work, whether it's inks or markers. Just make sure they're water-based. And then I went ahead and cut those little gnomes out on my brother's Scan and Cut, but there is a stamp set a die set that's available for those gnomes as well. Or you could fussy cut them with some little scissors too if you wanted. Now I'm going to stamp this background stamp, and it's a rubber stamp. So if you have a MISTI to stamp the thicker rubber stamps, you want to take that foam pad out of the bottom. It makes the inside of that MISTI deeper, and that's how you how you stamp the rubber stamps. And I'm also using Distress Oxide ink to do this background stamping. The reason I'm doing that is because oxides are a hybrid ink. They're part water or part dye base and part pigment, and it's the pigment portion that stays wet and is a little bit sticky, so that's why you can use that to heat emboss, so it stays wet longer and your embossing powder will stick to it. Now I'm using a Wagner heat gun. It gets really hot, and the hotter the heat gun, the faster it will melt the embossing powder, and then your paper won't have as much warpage to it. It will still warp a little bit, but not as much as if you had to hold a heat on there for a long time. And then here I'm using VersaFine Black Onyx ink, and that is a pigment ink, so it's perfect for heat embossing powders. And I like using the black ink with clear over the top instead of using black embossing powder. I just get a much cleaner, crisper impression that way. And then you can also use a hardboard, which is what I have there. I just get that from the art supply store and then have my husband cut it down to smaller pieces. Or you could use a cutting board or tweezers or a clothespin. Anything to keep your fingers away from the hot paper. Now I'm going to do some ink smushing, of course. So I'm going to use some Distress Heavy Stock, which is fantastic for this technique. It's really smooth, and I think that the colors end up being a much more vibrant, the Distress inks especially, and it dries really fast. So you're not spending as much time with the heat gun. I'm just using plain water to squirt on my little nonstick pad there. And then I went ahead and bought myself a Ranger heat tool because Tim Holtz said to. But he's right, it's great. It's quiet, it's really quiet. It gets super hot, so it helps things dry fast, but it also doesn't blow as much air as the Wagner tool does, so it doesn't move the inks and the water around very much. It just basically dries things where they are, so I'm really happy with that purchase. So now I'm about to use probably one of my top 5 favorite die sets of all times, and that is the A2 Layers dies from Waffle Flowers. They're just so versatile, and for me, it takes the math out of cutting mats and panels and frames and things, which is great because I am not mathy. So if I can just look at something and say, yeah, that looks good, and be on with my project, that makes me happy. There's also another set. This is the A2 Layers dies, and then there's an A2 additional layers dies, which they're the in-between sizes of these particular dies. And I have both of them, but I haven't used the other set quite as much, but they do the exact same thing. So if one set is out of stock, you can get the other set and it's not going to make that much difference. My new favorite sentiment die set is from Spellbinders, and it is called the Simply Perfect Mix and Match Sentiment Set. I love these because it's a scripty font, but they're easy to read. Some of them are kind of hard to read because they want to keep them all in one piece. But these ones are cute, and they're the perfect size. And then that glue is my new favorite, along with my Art Glitter Glue and my Gina K glue. It's called Barely Art Precision Glue. And I like it because it comes in a little set with a bunch of little tips and a really strong stainless steel pin that you can put in the tiny tip that keeps it clear, so it doesn't get all gunked up with glue. I haven't found that I'm struggling with this one as much as I do some of those other little metal tips, so I like it. And it dries pretty fast and it dries clear. So here I'm using a new tape for me. It's called Sticky Stuff. It's from joggles.com. It's a double-sided adhesive tape, and it's like score tape, but it's about a third the price, which is awesome. You get 3 times as much on a roll as you do on score tape, and it's much less expensive. And I like to use that really strong double-sided adhesive when I'm putting a warped panel that's either been ink smushed or watercolor or heat embossed or whatever on a background because it keeps it flat. And then here I'm using some 3M foam tape, and the reason I'm using that in this project is just because it's wide and I'm being lazy. I don't want to use little tiny strips. But you could certainly use, you could stack up layers of cardstock to give that dimension, or cut some foam strips and glue those down. You don't have to spend the big bucks on the 3M foam tape. And there's other brands of foam tape that you can use as well. I just happen to have this. And then I'm using those little craft shears there. Those are Tim Holtz craft shears. They come in 3 sizes. That's the medium size, and then there's some mini snips, and then a great big pair. I use all 3 all the time. They have some kind of a surface that's serrated that things don't stick to it, so it's great for cutting tape and other sticky things. Doesn't gum up the scissors at all. And my favorite foam squares are the 3D foam squares from Scrapbook Adhesives. And the reason I like those is because they're small, but they're also super sticky. So they're not, little pieces are not going to fall off. And then another of my top 5, is that my 3rd of my top 5 now, are the sentiment label dies from Simon Says Stamp. I use these for everything. They're just awesome. And they come with 2 sizes of that little fishtail, a small one and a big one, but I lost my small one. And you'll see in a second how easy it is to lose things. Oh, there it is. Put it back in the container. I actually think I threw the small one away. It was stuck to some tape and it got tossed in the trash, which is a bummer. But so I wanted that little flag, that little sentiment flag, to stand out away from the background a little bit. So I'm just ink blending a little bit of ink on there and using my favorite ink blending brushes from Tailored Expressions. Can't really tell you why they're better than others. I don't know if they're better, why I like them better. They're really soft. They seem to be a little more dense than some of the other ones. They hold the ink very well, and then they lay it down really well, so it's easy to blend, and they clean up nice when you brush them on like a microfiber towel. They clean up really nice. And then finally, one of my favorite things are reverse tweezers. I think everybody should have reverse tweezers in their stash. They're great because they hold on to things for you. It's like a clothespin kind of an action. So you don't have to worry about keeping them pinched closed with your hand. And I find that I don't drop things quite as much. I still drop things a lot, but... And I really like these ones. These are new for me from Spellbinders. They're really pointy. That's about it, guys. As always, you can find links to all the supplies that I used for this project in the video description on YouTube, and you can also find it on my blog at ladymichellecreates.com. So thanks so much for hanging out with me, and I will see you next time.